Welcome to On the Table with Ashley. We're excited to introduce our fourth official series of the podcast, which is on wellness. The series will be a deep dive into the true meaning of wellness, cutting through the noise of quick fixes and fleeting health trends to uncover what wellness truly looks like. Each episode, you'll hear from experts across different fields as they share how they approach health, from physical and mental health to holistic and alternative practices, to give you real, lasting ways to care for your mind, body, and spirit. Our first guest is Dr. Amit Anand, a distinguished pulmonary, critical care, and sleep medicine physician based in Boston, Massachusetts. With over 27 years of experience in his field, he integrates traditional medical practices with ancient yogic breathing techniques. For the past 25 years, he has been actively involved in teaching at esteemed institutions such as Harvard and Tufts Medical School. Beyond his medical practice, Dr. Anand is a certified yoga instructor and a practitioner of Pranayama, a branch of yoga focused on breath control. In his quest to bridge the gap between Eastern and Western health practices, Dr. Anand co-founded Breathonance, a platform that combines traditional pranayama techniques with modern music to enhance the effectiveness of breathwork. Enjoy.
Dr. Amit Anand, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to talk with you about breathwork today. Before we jump into that, I always like to start hearing where you grew up and what kind of kid you were when you were young.
Ashley, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you today. I grew up in Bombay, what's called Mumbai today. When I left India in 1990, it was certainly Bombay. Grew up in the 70s, the 80s. I was born in 65. My upbringing was in a naval family. My father was in the Navy. My mother was a physician. So we were on the move quite a bit, even though they tried to sort of have our schooling, my brother and myself, be in one city. We were constantly moving homes within the city of Mumbai. It was a wonderful time in my life, wonderful memories, great friends. Yeah, that's where I grew up.
So were you into sports or school or anything, like any activity in particular?
Yeah, I loved music. I loved drama. I loved debating. I loved elocution. So that was a big part of the creative sort of outlets to our upbringing. In our family, it was one instrument, one sport, one pet. So we always grew up with, those three, no matter where we lived in the city. I enjoyed sport. I can't say I was good at it, but my creative juices really started to flow when I was in drama and loved music.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to think about how you're incorporating that into your work now, or maybe you think about that. So you decided to go to medical school. Tell us what took you on that path.
So my mother was a doctor. She was a gynecologist. We came from a family of doctors on my mother's side. In fact, the first vaccine for tetanus actually was developed by her grandfather at an institute in Bombay.
Wow.
So there was a lot of influence, on the medical side of the spectrum. And when time came to enroll in medical school, I was kind of drifting towards my father's vocation a little bit, but he would have none of it. Knowing me, knowing the field of medicine, he sort of guided me also, as my mother's intention was for me to embrace medicine. So that's how medical school happened. It was a big influence from my mother's side of the family.
What was your father's vocation?
He was in the Indian Navy. He retired as an admiral, so he was always on ships, always moving.
So he didn't want you to follow in his footsteps. He wanted you to follow your mother's family's footsteps.
Correct. Just in terms of stability, not having to travel all that much, having a steady education, and for the value that, physicians had in that country at that time, even to this day. It was considered a very noble profession, so I wanted me to sort of channel my energies there.
So what specialty within medicine did you study, and did you pursue that before your path evolved towards wellness and breathwork?
Yeah, I was fascinated with breathing from a very young age. In medical school, I was always sort of gravitating towards those patients who had difficulties with breathing. In fact, I worked in an ICU where at the time we were exposed to ventilators as medical students for the first time. And we were dealing with a condition called tetanus. Tetanus is a condition that we don't see in the West because of vaccination when we were born. But it's pretty common still to this day in India. And it's a condition where the body contorts into a complete state of spasm and pain when the toxin envelops the nervous system. And it's painful to watch because you're still conscious, except that you're contorted in pain because your muscles are in spasm. And I would help take some of these patients both on and off the ventilators. And when they came off the ventilator, if they were lucky enough to survive that long, uniformly they would say to breathe again, not to live again, not to be pain-free, but to breathe again. And that kind of stuck with me in terms of how valuable breathing was, even to them going through the ravages of an illness as severe as tetanus. It was an attraction to breathing and breathing physiology and breathing pathology from a very young part of my medical career. I then sort of channeled straight into pulmonary, critical care, and finally sleep medicine. And all my subspecialty training is kind of glued by breathing.
Yeah, interesting. So today, are you still practicing in pulmonary and sleep as well as Breathonance? And then tell us about Breathonance and how that started.
Yeah, I'm still practicing. In fact, more than 70% of my time is clinical work. I'm at an academic medical center in Boston, which is affiliated with Harvard Medical School. It's called the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And I've been there for about 30 years now. I enjoy the academic vigor. I enjoy teaching, learning from students. It's kind of morphed more into the outpatient realm the older I've gotten, just because of the physical strain of the ICU, and especially with what we've all experienced through COVID. A lot of burnout. So I'm an outpatient practicing sleep and pulmonary physician. But on the other side of the fence is where I love teaching breathwork and have created this platform called Breathonance to actually engage people and students or whoever who wants to just learn how to breathe, to give them the basic principles of a good breathwork routine.
So how does Breathonance work?
Yeah, so Breathonance was born of my own teaching over the last 5 to 6 years, even before the pandemic. I was getting fascinated with breathing as a tradition in the yogic wisdom sort of teachings of India, but also with the clinical applications of some of these breathing practices on health and disease. I started teaching this online during the pandemic, and I found that there was a real interest because we were all going through a collective asphyxiation, if you will, at the time. And the more I started to do this and the more I started to sort of build a little community of breathers over here in Boston, it kind of just took off. There were people from different spheres of life who enrolled in the course. There was a friend of mine who was actually a musician at the Berklee College of Music in Boston who also took the course and loved what he was practicing and kind of just said, why don't you practice breathwork to music rather than a metronome, which seemed kind of monotonous and a little boring. And it was like this aha moment. I said, oh my God, music and breath, both rhythms inherently, why not synergize them and maximize their power exponentially? So that's how Breathonance was born. He kind of started to create musical rhythms to the breathing practices. We put them together. I continued with the online teaching and then some live events. I did one in Park City actually a couple of years ago. And the feedback was, this is effortless. This is fun. This is engaging. We want more. So that's where we are on our journey now.
So you're doing it together, the two of you?
Yes. Clint Valadares, he's my partner in crime. He's the musical talent. And he creates the rhythms, either through the slow breathing tracks or the fast breathing tracks. And we kind of pace them, over a 4 to 5 minute window. You can loop them, repeat them, depending upon how much time you have in your day. But it feels like when you do it to music, suddenly that 5 minutes feels like 5 seconds. It goes by very quickly.
So I want to understand how the platform works. And then I have so many questions about the breathing and the impact on our lives. But so if you have, is Breathonance is an app, and that's where you both learn how to breathe and then also get access to the breathing rhythms with the music that you can use every day. Is that accurate? Is it a service like a monthly fee, or just tell us how it works?
So it's relatively new. We just launched a few months ago. If you go to breathonance.com, it's a website and it's a repository of breathing lessons, which for a fee, anyone can get. So it's not yet subscription based. The plan is to get there. But right now, if you wanted to learn what I call these lessons of breathfulness, you can get them for a fee. It kind of takes you from step A all the way till the end in terms of building a practice of breath 1 week at a time or at your own pace. It doesn't have to be that quickly, to fully appreciate the power of a breath practice now set to musical rhythms with all the yogic wisdom, the instructions, the practice to music, both in video and audio format, and the science. And that's very important because of the applications being of medical bent. How does this practice apply to human physiology or human biology? So it's all there on the website. We also do live workshops a few times each year. The intention is over the next few months, as we build up our music and breathing catalog, is that we will start to live stream this on a weekly basis as the community builds of breathers.
Okay. And now my understanding is that there are many different types of breath practices, and that you focus, and correct me if I'm wrong, primarily on pranayama, which is an ancient yogic practice with the name coming from the Sanskrit prana, which is life force or vital energy, often linked to breath, and ayama, which means to extend, control, or regulate. So can you describe pranayama for the audience and share the cultural and historical significance and why you chose that practice?
Sure. So, if you Google breathwork today, you're going to come across more than 100 different forms of practice, whether it's Wim Hof, whether it's 4-7-8, whether it's a Buteyko breathing, whether it's holotropic breathwork, whether it's Lamaze. It's all breathwork, right? But if you look at where all of these traditions take root, in my opinion, it all stems from a tradition of breathing in yoga called pranayama. And pranayama is just one of the 8 spokes of the Ashtanga yoga tradition of India. The other 7 are the do's and the don'ts, or the moral principles and the ethical precepts by which we lead our lives. Asana, which is very commonly taught in the West as a body-based practice. Pranayama, which is breath work, which sets the table for interoception, which is inward attention, concentration, meditation, and emancipation. So breathwork is just one spoke of that wheel. And it says you don't need to do this sequentially. You can touch any spoke and you're going to touch them all. And for those who are limited, by virtue of their physical being, if they're inflexible or they're in pain, breathing is always there.
Yeah.
It's the first thing we do when we're born into this world, the last thing we do. And that's where the yama to prana comes in. So prana, as you rightly said, is energy. It's not breath. It's more than breath. It's energy. It's the vitality principle in our being. It's the conscious aspect to consciousness. It's the attentive aspect to attention. So it's that vitality principle. It's energy. And we use the instrument that is our breathing. We control, extend, manipulate to create that energetic feel in our being. So it's a feeling value, And you look at all of these traditions of breathwork, all of them have some principles of pranayama. So I said, rather than studying all of these individually, why not go to the source? And it's a 6,000-year-old tradition. And it's very poorly taught, even to this day, even in India, which is, where this wisdom resides. And that was my challenge in terms of who do I find, who do I seek, who do I learn from, so that it resonates not only with me as a medical doctor, but what's the science behind this and how do I bring it to my patients? What are the applications of pranayama for the person I see across the table?
So, one, why is it poorly taught, do you think, even in India? And two, who did you learn from?
I think breathwork is one of those secrets, literally, out there in the yogic world, which is now sort of unraveling. And one of the reasons is, as valuable as it can be as an ally, it can also be a very dangerous foe. So you start to manipulate breath and you start to create perturbations in oxygen and CO2, you can create havoc in your physiology if it's unrestrained. And that's the problem that I had with some of these traditions. When I would go to some of these classes and I would see these people hyperventilating into a state of euphoria or an out-of-body experience, they would commonly say, oh my God, that was the most amazing thing that I experienced, but my physical body is doing this. And I'll say, well, I'll tell you why it's happening is because your CO2 levels are rock bottom right now. That's why you have numbness around your face, and that's why you have tingling in your fingers, and that's why you feel like you're going to pass out. Is probably because you're very close to a seizure. So that's this dilemma between controlled and uncontrolled, and breathing sits at that precipice of restraint and unrestrained. And not many people really appreciate that, in the yogic side of the field. And being a lung doctor and understanding a little bit about human physiology and breathing, I wanted to bring that restraint to the practice where it was safe, it was a tangible experience. You could certainly do it for spiritual intent, but the goal was for health and happiness. And that's why I couldn't find a teacher for the longest time. And finally, after going to India, researching this for almost 10 years, I came upon my teacher, ironically, in a place that is not too far from where I grew up in Mumbai. It's a little hill station tucked away in an institute called the Kalyadham Institute. I walked in and I spoke with this gentleman who at the time was in his late 70s, but he ran the institute. And I knew, when you have this knowingness that you've met the person who you need to be with or you need to learn from, I knew he was my teacher. And then I just kept going back once every year for these, 2-week retreats. It sort of spiraled on itself, and I became fascinated with the way it was taught in that tradition. But it was also with an emphasis on science. So he would say that, none of this matters if science cannot validate it, cannot prove it, because yoga is also a science.
Fascinating. So this has been a journey. So, okay, let's get into how breathing and health. So, a lot of times you'll hear about breathing for managing anxiety or fear or things like that, or even sleep, I think. But it sounds like from a very early age, your fascination with breathing has been more fundamental than that. So how is it affecting our bodies, the potential to become diseased or to manage disease, whether it's chronic or not chronic? So tell us a little bit about what you've learned over the years and how you believe that breathonance and the breathing that you are teaching, I'll call it restrained breathing, you might have a name for it, but is helping with people's health. And then are you tracking that?
Yeah, so let's try and parse that out. So in the breathwork tradition, the reason why breathing is so relevant is that it sits at the interface of both the mind and the body. And you are completely unaware that it's happening in the backdrop. But as soon as you bring attention to it and bring it to the foreground, suddenly you have the power to manipulate both mind and body. So you start to create a slow practice or a fast practice, there will be bodily changes. You start to create a slow practice or a fast practice, there will be mental and emotional changes because breathing sits right at that junction point. So when you start to take control of breathing, how does it work? Well, it works through the nervous system. Yes, it's an act that is mechanical, that involves the exchange of gas from the outside to within and from within to the out, but it primarily works through the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is one aspect of the nervous system that is responsible for visceral control. So we have a lot of organs in our body, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the gut. Pretty much everything is innervated by the autonomic axis. And there are two branches to it. There's the sympathetic side of it, which is the system of fight and fright and charge. It's the alerting, the arousal system. Very valuable when we are faced in the setting of stress or in front of a predator. It gives us charge to run. And on the other side is parasympathetic, which is more cool, calming, restorative, restful. And most of us, by virtue of the lives that we lead today, are on the sympathetic side. And the older we get, we tend to become even more sympathetically driven, right? What's COVID-19? COVID-19 was sympathetic storms, if you will. I mean, you were having physiologic storms of sympathetic activity within our system. And when we get into a state of sympathetic over excess, it's going to result in disease, dis-ease. Most commonly, fatigue. But when it gets to extreme forms, it's going to have inflammatory conditions manifest. It doesn't matter where. It'll cause problems with sleep-wake. It'll cause problems with mood and memory. So the purpose of breathwork, and that's why I find it to be so valuable, is that once you develop a practice that involves re-regulating the autonomic axis from sympathetic overexcess to a little bit of parasympathetic balance, then health happens. It has to happen naturally. So you go from a state of storm to a state of calm. And when you are in that state of balance, well, everything changes. Your body changes. Your mind changes. Your emotions have to follow. So that's why it's such a valuable practice, because it sits right at that junction point, and it's something that we can control if we choose to.
Okay, so tell us if you have done so far any scientific studies on the impact of breathwork on, I love how you said this, dis-ease and then moving towards health.
Yeah, so in fact, if you look at the literature over the last 5 years, it's exploded. On breathwork, I mean, people all across the globe are fascinated with breathing as a practice and its applications on health. Now, if I just told you that's the autonomic nervous system through which it manifests its power, right? And it's all visceral function, well, there are applications on the heart. So you look at breathwork on heart and you find that, yes, when you make a habit of breathwork, your blood pressure drops, your heart rate drops. You become more heart rate variable. So you've heard of this term HRV, heart rate variability, which we all monitor. When you look at the lung, turns out that even though you're breathing slowly and much more deeply or with a fuller breath, it's not coming at the cost of gas exchange. In fact, your oxygen saturations go up. Your CO2 levels from a state of constant hyperventilation, they come to a state of balance, what's called eucapnia. Your posture changes. You stand more upright. Uprightness in breath is uprightness in life, and vice versa. You look at the gut. You look at the hormonal milieu. You look at the inflammatory cascade. Everything is touched, Ashley, when you start to incorporate breath. Now, in terms of what we are doing in Boston, I've been, teaching yoga, as I said, to a lot of patients anecdotally, now, in person. But we created a protocol for spinal cord injured patients a couple of years ago, where we taught them this practice called Ujjayi, or the ocean breath, for a few minutes each day over a span of 4 weeks. And it was remarkable that these patients who are basically severed at the level of their spinal axis, and they have chaotic control of both blood pressure and heart rate, within a few minutes of doing this Ujjayi practice, everything becomes coherent. There's complete coherence at these resonant rhythm breathing practices of ocean breath or Ujjayama, where there's complete magical settling of heart rate and blood pressure. They start to feel better, the gas exchange improves, and we've also been looking at their sleep, because it's one of the most important aspects of what we do as adults, is how does this modulate sleep. We've also done some work with folks with interstitial lung disease. This is a kind of condition where there's profound inflammation in the lungs. We don't know the reasons why this happens, but it tends to progress very rapidly. Actually, it was part of a protocol through the University of Washington during the pandemic, where we taught this online to almost 80 patients. And uniformly, all their aspects of life, quality of life, to the extent that we could monitor them during a pandemic, all got better. And there was peace that happened. They were sleeping better despite being, anxious about what was happening around them. So that's what we have been doing. We are currently in the process of writing for grants to further explore some of these applications, both in the spinal cord injured population. I'm very, very passionate about sleep. And so we're looking at the roles of how breathwork might modulate arousal, how arousal may affect folks who deal with insomnia, and sometimes even folks who have issues with breathing at night by virtue of nasal obstruction. So cases of snoring, sleep apnea, things like that.
So I took one of your classes and you said that you do your breathing in the morning. You might also do some different breath work at night, but I wanted to talk about the time of day for breath work and if and whether and why that matters, and the length of the practice to see a benefit.
Yeah, so I have a personal practice, which I'm not saying everyone needs to do, but my personal practice, just by virtue of where it's led me in life, is now almost a 35 to 40 minute practice. First thing in the morning after I wake up, I've washed away my sleep, I've visited the restroom, I'm hopefully not tired because sleep has happened, and I'm fresh and I'm ready for the experience of breath. The stomach is light, the diaphragm works better, and you're sitting upright and doing this in silence because most of the world is still sleeping at that time. I wake up very early in the morning. But breath work can be done anytime. It can be done any time of day for as long as you want. The only real guidelines is that it should be done on a light stomach. Because if the stomach is full, then the diaphragm's not going to work. There's going to be a lot of work with that prime mover of breath, the most important muscle of breath, which is the diaphragm. So if you're going to do it before food. If you're going to do it after food, give yourself at least a couple of hours to let the stomach empty out before you start breathing.
Well, I guess, are there different kinds of breath work you would do in the morning versus the evening? So it sounds like you should have an empty stomach. That's really the main requirement. And then the length of the practice can vary. I mean, in the class that you taught, you said even 5 minutes can be quite useful. So I think it's important for people to hear because people have all kinds of practices. They meditate, they go to the gym, they go to yoga, they do grounding. So adding 35 to 40 minutes on top of some other practice might seem daunting to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure like anything, it's a journey for the individual. So finding what time of day is best for you as an individual, the length of time that's best for you, because presumably you can add meditation and breathwork together. So I think there are combinations that you can make, but I think it's always helpful to start with like, okay, what is the minimum where you can actually see a benefit so that people can try it on? And then if they see a benefit, then they can sort of go on this journey to figure out what's best for them.
So let me refer you to a very important piece of science that was published 2 years ago through the Andrew Huberman lab in Stanford. They actually looked at 4 different kinds of practices, 3 of which employed breathwork for only 5 minutes a day. The 3 breathing practices were cyclic sighing, which in yoga we call ujjayi, is what I teach, box breathing, cyclic hyperventilation followed by apnea, which is a form of Wim Hof, if you will, and mindfulness meditation. Only 5 minutes a day for 4 weeks. With just that intervention, 4 weeks later, there were tangible changes in blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygen saturations, and mood, and how they assessed this phenomenon of arousal by, right? Just 5 minutes once a day for 4 weeks. Now, if you can't make 5 minutes once a day for 4 weeks, then you probably need to do it 5 minutes twice a day for 4 weeks. All right? It's 0.007% of the amount of breaths that you take in one day. That's all you need to focus on for 5 minutes. And it's such a wonderful practice, and I'm obviously biased, because I've been doing this for a long time, but I've heard this from so many people. The more breath aware you become, the more breath aware you will want to be. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. But all I say is 5 to 10 minutes a day is a good start. And it doesn't need to take away from anything else in your life. Not your meditation practice, certainly not your Peloton routine. Just 5 minutes once a day or 5 minutes twice a day is a good start, and let it do its thing.
You said in the class, sometimes, or perhaps all the time, you will do this practice as you're driving to work. So you could do it in the car. It doesn't have to be like you're sitting still in one space, which I think also lends itself to, you could do it almost anywhere.
When do you spend the most time with the people you love? For us, it's at home, around the dinner table with family, or sipping cocktails in the living room with friends. So why not make that time even more meaningful by imbuing your gatherings with pieces that not only make connecting easier, but spark conversation around your table? Amaton's collection of small batch, artisan, quality-made pieces for tabletop and home are not only made for simple serving, they're works of art designed for daily use. Whether you're hosting a dinner party or sitting down for family game night, our collections create a sense of presence and peace in every home. Shop our collection of dinnerware, drinkware, serveware, and more at amatond.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com. Gather by design.
Yeah, so on Breathonance, there are different practices that we teach. There's a posture practice of breath. There's a slow breathing practice. There's a nostril practice. There's a breath holding practice. There are fast practices. So each of these can be done at different times of day, depending upon what you're trying to elicit as the response. So if you feel dull, you feel slow, you feel lethargic, well, I want to stir my energies up. I rev myself up with a fast practice, a warming practice, a heating practice. If I'm in a state of inflammation, a state of stress, I want to cool myself down. There are certain cooling practices that you can do. So it all depends on where you are and what is relevant to your time of day. You can choose which you want to manifest with breathwork at that point in your daily routine. Yeah, so it kind of varies depending upon where you are in your time of day and what you want to manifest.
So when you were talking about the breathwork in the car, that was more a morning routine to sort of wake you up. And then perhaps there would be a different sort of more cooling routine that you would do before bed.
Correct. So on my way to work, now since we've created Breathonance and it's Pranayama music, I just let it fly with the windows up, and I'm doing my breath of fire routine for about 15 minutes. By the time I get to work, I'm open, I'm clean, I'm clear in my sinuses, in my nasal passages, and just my state of mind is fresh. I'm ready to tackle my day. Similarly, on the way home, I'll do a different kind of breathing practice depending upon the kind of day that I've had. If there's been a lot of charge with a lot of ICU stress, I want to cool myself down. Well, I'm going to practice a certain kind of practice so that by the time I get home, I certainly don't want to bring that burden of stress to my family. That's my time with them. I certainly don't want to bring the ICU home, if you will. So there are different routines, different times of day that can be of great value. When I'm finding that I'm particularly stressed, I've had a stressful encounter, I'll take 5 minutes, even during the daytime, almost like a little breath snack, if you will. 5 minutes of alternate nostril just settles me down, balances sympathetic, parasympathetic, lets me go of the stress that I was dealing with, and I'm ready for the next one. So again, once you learn the tenets of breathwork, the principles of breathwork, it can be applicable any time of day, any time of life.
Okay. And then does it affect the way you're breathing all the other many minutes of the day? So your practice, let's say, is 35 to 45 minutes, but let's say I'm doing 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening. Does that over time start to affect the way I'm breathing all the rest of the minutes of my day?
This is such an important question, Ashley. This is what we talk about, state versus trait effects of breathing. So when you're actually doing the practice, well, there's a state effect. Well, blood pressure changes, gas exchange changes, mood changes, arousal changes. But what is the spillover? What is the memory of that practice, and how does it resonate in our lives outside of the practice? Because that's really why we're doing this, is to have happier, fulfilling, more healthier lives. And if you actually looked at the breathing rate of people who've been doing breath work either for 30 minutes a day or even sometimes 4 hours of practice, across the spectrum for an average span of 4 years. And this is what actually got me started on my journey in 1986 as a fellow. There was this paper published out of Belgium where they looked at 8 yoginis who had been incorporating breathwork in their life, and they compared them with controls, same age, gender, etc. And they found that their breathing rhythm, their breathing pattern was very distinct from someone, you and me, who had not done breathwork. So the average human being normally breathes about 12 to 16 breaths a minute. When you start to do breathwork, you slow your breathing down. It becomes anywhere between 4 to 7 breaths per minute, which is called resonant frequency breathing. And the more you do this, more it starts to carry over outside of the practice, such that when they looked at these 8 yogis and yoginis, they had a breathing pattern which was slow frequency, large volume. So they're breathing at about 5.5 breaths per minute, 800 to a liter in terms of their breath, as opposed to a half a liter in terms of volume, which is what normal breathing is. And did it come at any cost? Well, their oxygen saturations are actually higher than the people who hadn't done breath work. Their CO2 levels were a little higher, and their blood pressure and their heart rate were a little lower. So that's when the trait effects start to manifest in life outside of the state effects during the practice. And once that happens, then, as I said, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You just want to keep doing it. You become so much more aware of breath and how it impacts every aspect of your daily life.
So does your whole family do breathwork?
I wish, Ashley, I wish. Yeah, so this is something you can't force on anyone, right?
Yeah.
When you're ready to learn it, the teacher will arrive. I've tried to set an example for my kids primarily, and especially my youngest had some stress around soccer and how he performs on game day. We do a certain breathing routine, and he's found the value of doing this before he plays his game. But I've now taught him that, it's not just about the game, it's about the practice.
Right.
And making this happen on the days when he's not in game day mode so that he doesn't feel so stressed. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that everyone in my family does it. I hope that I serve as an example. But as I said, when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Yeah. What about with your patients in your outpatient work? Do you introduce the practice to them routinely?
Yeah, for certain states. So there are conditions which I feel are certainly benefited by a regular routine. As I said, any disorder of arousal, any disorder of chronic inflammation stands to benefit with downregulation of the autonomic axis. Some patients with insomnia who are very hypervigilant, and that spills over into the night. I'll tell them, explore this, not necessarily breathonance, but some kind of, routine which incorporates a little more mindfulness and breathfulness in their lives. What's interesting is that I've gotten to know over time, and this is not just me being a clinician for 35 years and the experience that comes with clinical work, but I've gotten to know, especially since I've made breathwork a part of my life, is when it's right and when it's not right to introduce the concept. And you can tell there are so many nonverbal cues when you sit with someone across the table or in a chair where you know what they want to say without them saying it. And you also know when it's the right time to say it or to introduce them to that concept. So there's a knowingness that's come with this practice, just in terms of my own personal growth as a clinician. There's almost like an intuitive aspect to my work where I know where you are. I think this may be of value, or maybe this is not of value for you at this point in time. And they're very receptive.
And do you think that knowingness is based on their receptiveness, or is it more a clinical assertion on your part that it wouldn't benefit them?
So they're both. There's certainly, in terms of the clinical, I will, if it's not clinically relevant, I don't even touch it. But if there's a clinical benefit to be had, then the knowingness value has to come into play. Is this the right time to introduce the concept with them? And are they ready for this? And as I said, it doesn't have to be a pranayama.
Right.
It could be a yoga class. It could be mindfulness-based stress reduction. It could be non-sleep deep rest, what Huberman teaches. There's so many different methodologies out there which help down-regulate the autonomic axis.
And have you ever partnered with a physician who treats heart patients to do similar work?
So we're doing that right now. So a lot of electrophysiologists, believe it or not, those doctors in cardiology that deal with arrhythmia. So when the heart rhythm is irregular, it's either too fast, it's too slow, and especially it's irregular. A lot of these influences on heart rhythm are driven by sympathetic excess. And the electrophysiologists of the world have this great interest in figuring out how to modulate autonomic tone so as to better control heart rhythm without the use of medication, or maybe use lesser doses of medication. So they've kind of gotten interested. I'm speaking to a couple of people in Austin, Texas, a couple of electrophysiologists in Boston over here. Interestingly, my first foray into Park City was because of a friend of mine who had this problem with arrhythmia. And he started doing breathwork. And he said, Amit, you know what? I can now control my heart rhythm just by incorporating 5 minutes of alternate nostril breathing. I can slow it down just like that. Why did you not tell me this before? So it led to, the workshop in Park City, and, met some wonderful people over there. So my hope is that I'll probably come back again and maybe do a workshop in Park City.
That sounds amazing. I know Autumn would love to do that with you again. I mean, it sounds like there could be a way, one of the things that I dislike about our Western medicine and medical system is that we're always trying to treat what we see without thinking about how we prevent that thing from appearing in the first place. And then also to treat it with a pill or a medicine instead of lifestyle interventions. It seems like there could be studies so that you could know when this could actually be incorporated into clinical care, for what patients, at what point in their journey, or even people who know that they have a higher risk of some of these issues because of genetic or familial issues, that their physicians could actually prescribe some of these practices as part of clinical care prophylactically. Do you think that that's an unreasonable objective in our lifetime?
I don't think it's unreasonable at all, Ashley. In fact, the more I've witnessed this change in medicine from within, a lot of my colleagues are sick and fed up with the way they practice. They're burnt out. They don't want to be just pushing medications. But the sad reality of this is that they were never taught differently. So it's not a part of our curriculum in medical school, right? So even as a pulmonary fellow who trained at the Mass General in Boston, one of the major institutions of learning, as a pulmonary fellow, I was never taught to teach my patients how to breathe. I could figure out what your disease was, I could give you an inhaler. I could give you a pill. I could give you the magic bullet approach very quickly. In fact, the sicker you were, the more excited I was trained to become. But I was never taught to teach them how to breathe. And so this is going through a change, and I'm certainly seeing it, not only in Boston, but across medical schools across the globe, because it's driven by our patients. They're fed up of taking just pills and more pills and medications. I mean, yes, they're invested in wanting to know more about themselves through wearable technology and, the other gadgets that we have out there, but they're also looking to incorporate behaviors like this. As physicians, we need to learn how first before we can teach them and, more importantly, acknowledge them, that this is a very important part of their lives.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that more physicians are interested in that. And then the medical system has to come along and teach medical students about it as well. So that they have the tools. So one thing I feel like, so we're talking about the sympathetic system and how I feel like today that system, it's completely rational that system is revved up because we have our smartphones. We have lights, we can be up all time of day and night. We have our televisions and our, everything that's just sort of coming at us all the time. Even I would say from the time like I was a child to now, it's such a dramatic difference in the expectations that people have and like how quickly you'll get back to them and what you'll be doing and reviewing in a day and all of these things. Do you know if there's historical data on the number of breaths? So you said the typical person today, 12 to 16 breaths a minute. Somebody who's been practicing breathwork for I think you said 4 years, could be 4 to 7 breaths a minute. Do we have any historical data on, was that 12 to 16 lower in the past when we didn't have all of these stimuli and perhaps our sympathetic system was not as revved up?
So 12 to 16 is just a normal human. I would argue that if you had to assess someone who's charged, who's anxious, who's burnt out, they'll probably be in the 20s. So we don't have historical data to assess breathing rate, but certainly just by virtue of what we do in the clinical realm, we can see people when they are anxious, they're breathing at 20. They're shallow breathers. It's all nipple up. When they're calm, they're navel down. So it's certainly something that we see. And as breathing rate goes, so goes emotion. So you tend to become much more anxious the more shallower you breathe, and the more calm, the deeper you do. So we don't have historical data per se, but it's encouraging that at least we have some history now, over the last 30, 40 years, that people who do this kind of work can actually change their pattern of breathing and, more importantly, do much more with less. So, for example, if you had to practice slow, deep, nostril, upright breathing consistently such that it became a part of your life consistently, you would find that everything you did outside of the practice is much more efficient. So there are folks who have gone to the extremes of atmosphere, right? So people who've scaled Everest without oxygen. In fact, there was a beautiful paper by Luciano Bernardi from Italy who looked at just this phenomenon of summiters who ascended K2 and Everest without oxygen and their breathing rates. And they were taught to actually breathe slow, and they compared slow breathing across these climbers, and they found that the ones who breathed slower were more likely to summit without oxygen at the peak of these tall mountains. You look at the phenomenon of freedivers. So people who actually breath hold and then they dive. They get into a state of storm followed by a state of complete suspension, and then they go. And depending upon how they've been doing their practice and what kind of practice they've been doing, it allows them to experience even deeper depths of the ocean and their practice. So there are conditions, even in normal humans, where a breathwork practice can make you much more efficient in terms of just athletic endeavor, free diving, mountain climbing. And so why not just, do it for those reasons if you don't have disease? I mean, there's certainly aspects to breathwork that apply there.
So, and this may be a hard question because there are so many different types of breath work to do at different times of day. But if you could give everybody one simple breath habit to start doing today, what would it be?
So if I had a wish for every man, woman, child on planet Earth, it would be the Ujjayi practice of pranayama. It's also called the ocean breath. It's the breath that we create on the exhale by constricting our glottis and generating the sound of ha on the out, as if you were fogging the eyeglasses. And once you master that sound, that vibration, you internalize it such that it emanates now through the nose on the exhale. The nostril inhale is silent, and then you start to pace your breathing rhythm. So a 5-second in, a 5-second out, a 6-second in, a 6-second out, or 4-second in, a 6-second out. So somewhere in that resonant rhythm range, 5 minutes a day. That's all. That would be the wish for every person.
That's amazing. I'm thinking about this book, and I'm going to forget the author. It's called Breath. I'm sure you've read it or heard of it. And in the book, the author talks about our human evolution. So how our noses have changed for the worse, frankly, probably because we chew less and all of these different things. It sounds like breathing can help with, even though those are issues we can't solve. I mean, we have what we have, but that breathing can help with those issues, help manage those issues, those evolutionary issues, which are actually negatives. Is that fair?
Yes. So that book is wonderful. James Nestor is a friend.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. He actually came to Boston to look at some of the work that we were doing 2017, 2018, I believe. Yeah, the book was published in 2020. But he has very nicely sort of talked about nostril over mouth and the value of nostril breathing as a species. And we've forgotten how to use our noses to breathe. In fact, most of us, just by virtue of our diet, our dentition, the lives we lead, we have tend to become much more mouth breathers. And there's a value in relearning how to breathe through the nose. Turns out that in prana, one of the most important receptacles for prana or energy is the roof of the nose. Right here. It's not the lungs, it's the roof of the nose. In fact, that's where COVID-19 enters the system when you develop a sense of nose smell, right? Maintaining patency is so relevant, and maintaining cleanliness and hygiene of the nasal airway in the waking state, but also there's a spillover into the night. For those of us who snore, who have issues with mouth breathing at night, it can be extremely valuable in terms of just being a good nostril breather and how it affects sleep architecture and sleep stability. Now, for example, I have significant nasal septal deviation, and I've not had that surgically corrected because I haven't had time. But I still, with 95% blockage of my deviated septum to the left, I can still do a pranayama practice because with pranayama, even that 5% is open, it's clean, and I can regulate flow and volume. So we're all different. We're all born differently. We have, influences that shape us through our lives. But certainly a breathwork practice can keep us healthy and keep us patent and keep us going.
That's fascinating. Okay, the ocean breath. What have you learned about yourself, medically, emotionally, or spiritually through breathwork?
So medically, it's made me much more of an empathetic clinician, I would say, as I was talking about intuition. The more I've dived into a practice like this, the more aware I have become of these patterns within me that I see in others, and vice versa. So I feel it's made me a better clinician. I have a lot more empathy and understanding. I also have a lot better clarity and judgment when it comes to decision making. I find that I'm able to parse out things quickly, efficiently, with clarity, and more often than not, in a meaningful way for my patients. So medically, it's made my clinical practice very different, even through the years of doing this. And medically also, it's kind of opened up doors for research. Because the more I've started to talk about this to my colleagues, the more I've realized there are a lot of closet pranayamis out there wanting to learn something that they can help teach their patients. So it's opened up avenues for research, which is really exciting for me, because that's how we will change our field from within. When we have published data that espouses the value of some of these traditions, I think that's how we change it. Emotionally, it's made me happier. I'm certainly less disturbed by the daily stresses of life. I mean, we all go through stuff, but I don't tend to delve as long as I did in the woes of life, because just like the inhale and the exhale, that too shall pass, has to change. And spiritually, that's a question that different people will have sort of different answers for. But for me, growing up in India in a family that espoused the spiritual tradition a lot more than just even the physical tradition, it's really made me appreciate what I grew up with around me as a kid, which I had no value for. And now as an adult, and now doing this, I am drawn towards those teachings. I'm taking interest in studying some of these texts and treatises, which are thousands of years old, but which have so much relevance to our daily lives today. If only we stopped to listen and learn, and to ourselves first, and then to a lot of these traditions. And it's opened the doors to my own spiritual practice also with meditation.
At the end of every episode, I like to ask the same 5 questions of guests. But before I do that, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share about breathwork or your work in this area or your journey?
No, it's a transformative time in our world, in our country, in our individual lives. We're all going through a lot of catharsis, a lot of change, but we're all interconnected with each other. The air we share is what links us. And I would hope that we can impart this not only to each other, but to the next generation of breathers that come behind us, is that just have value for the person across the table or the person across the street, because we're all linked. We're all linked, yes, by breath, but by a lot more. And breath serves as the gateway to that lot more, if only you are willing to take a chance.
The reason that I started this podcast and my brand is because I feel like we've lost a lot of our recognition of our similarities. I mean, we always have so many more similarities than differences, and yet today we seem to focus on our differences more. So I love this reminder. As we explore in my brand, Amit Anand, which means it's French for to take care of your soul, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to be more present in the here and now, or even take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
So the object in my life is this little statue of the elephant god. In India, it's called Ganesha. Ganesha has the body of a human, but the head of an elephant. And there's a whole tradition behind it. But in India, every home, whether it's rich or it's poor, will always have a little statue of Ganesha, because Ganesha is the remover of all obstacles. So whenever we embark on a new venture, a new adventure, a new journey, I was always told to rub the belly of Ganesha because he's got this big Buddha belly. And so every room in our house has a Ganesha. In fact, I'll show you what Ganesha looks like here. I keep it next to me. Little elephant god.
Okay.
We rub his belly before we leave for work, before we go run the marathon, before we go to the ICU, before we leave home on vacation. So that's a little ritual that we have. That's the object in our lives.
So does your son rub the belly before a soccer game?
Yes, he does.
Amazing. I think I need to get one. I love this. Can you share a favorite tradition? It could be something from when you were a child or something you do with your family today. Anything at all.
As a child, I think one of the sweetest memories was my mom. And especially at night when she would put my brother and me to bed, she would always say, go to bed happy. Don't hold any animosity against anyone who's wronged you in your day to day. Let it go, just for tonight. Bring it back tomorrow morning if you so choose to, but tonight, let it go. And I've realized that little affirmation, and I do this now very routinely, both for myself and for my kids, is that I make a habit of actually practicing gratitude for what was and forgiveness at the end of my day, so as to let my sleep be a little more stable, a little more peaceful, a little deeper. Because when I sleep well, I relate well with everyone. So it's kind of helped sort of both ways, It's a sweet ritual which I didn't realize the value of until I became a sleep doctor.
I love that. And I did a series on death and dying, and one of the books that was recommended is called The 4 Things That Matter Most, and written by a palliative care doctor. And he wrote about forgiveness. And to me, this was just sort of groundbreaking. And this concept that you do not have to feel forgiveness to give forgiveness. And I just love that, because sometimes you're not ready to feel forgiveness, but you can always be ready to give forgiveness, because when you don't forgive, you're actually hurting yourself more than, anybody else. So
beautiful. Yeah, so true, Ashley. And my mom would say, even if you just wanted to let go of that grievance tonight, you bring it back tomorrow if you're still upset with your friend, but tonight, let it go.
I love that. I love that. Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
So I used to entertain a lot more when I'm 60, and the older I've gotten, and I just feel like I have so much finite energy to deal with in the daytime, and I'm always in a stressful situation in my clinical world. So I try to preserve that energy. It's about energy that's cultivating, energy that's nourishing. Do I like to entertain? I do, but not as much as I did when I was, even 10 years younger than who I am today. But it's being with folks who share the same energy, may not share the same thoughts or the same emotions, but energetically, that's what I look to cultivate.
I love that. Share the same energy. Do you have 1 or 2 top resources? Breathonance can be one, but they could be books or websites or podcasts or anything. It doesn't have to be related to breathwork. It could just be like a favorite book. Also, we love to recommend books to listeners. I love to get top resources because they're helpful for me, but also for listeners.
Yeah, so breathonance.com, certainly. I would want to put that out there in the universe. We're going to be building more and more with the music and the breathwork practices. We'd love to build a breathing community, not just locally in Boston, but globally, and especially for the next generation of breathers. The books that have really influenced me, I would say Nestor's book on breath was a big influence.
It's amazing.
Very well written. It's a lovely story. And then Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker.
My husband read that, but I haven't read it.
And I will tell you, as in terms of my clinical practice, as a lung doctor, as an ICU doctor, I can fix you, get you out of the ICU, make you breathe better, make you healthier, but I can't make you happier. If I make you sleep better, I will make you happier. So there's this whole importance that's now come to me with sleep medicine that I've begun to appreciate. And it's really beautifully written, the research on sleep over the last 30, 40 years. It's a subspecialty still in its infancy, but he's really chronicled it well. In terms of pranayama, there's a book on pranayama by Andre van Lisbeth. I believe he was from Belgium or France. The Energetics of Breath. And that's it's just a magical book. I don't know whether they're still publishing it, but it talks more about the feeling value of the practice rather than the actual practice itself. Very important, but how do you cultivate the energetics of breath? And then growing up in India, the book that I read when I was young, which I didn't realize until I reread it, 20 years later for the nth time, the autobiography of a yogi, which is the life of Yoganand Paramahansa, who was one of the saints who walked this earth more than 100 years ago, who came to America. He opened up a lot of missions on the West Coast in California and taught a lot of Kriya Yoga, some of these practices also. But it was written so beautifully and so simply and chronicles his life in terms of his experiences. and his different states of consciousness across his lifespan. He died young.
I have some new books to get. I'm so excited. My last question, and I kind of feel like we've spent this whole time talking a lot about this, so you may not have much to add, but what do you do for yourself? You obviously have a breathwork practice, you have a meditation practice, and maybe these are the things you want to say again, but what is it that you do regularly that contributes to your success and your well-being? And I suspect it is a lot of these things.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, so breathwork has become a part of my daily routine. Initially it used to be a crutch for crisis. So whenever I was stressed, whenever I needed something to be done, I would use the 5-minute practice until somewhere along the way, the flip switched. And I said, why don't I just do this more, and maybe I won't have crisis in my life, like I was having. It turned out to be true. So, and each person comes across that at their own pace, at their own time. But now it's become the work of my day. So I do not leave home without my 35 minutes in the morning. And then I try and get these breath snacks during the daytime. So it's really become a part of my life in a very tangible way. And it's made me certainly much more happier human, much more relatable, as my family would say.
I'm so excited. Thank you for talking with us. I've learned so much. I am definitely checking out Breathonance and buying a bunch of these books. It's amazing. People have so many important things to teach us. Most of us don't think about our breath. It's something that we do automatically, but if we could do it more intentionally, it's remarkable the impact it could have on our lives. I'm super grateful, and it's been such a joy talking with you. And when you come to Park City, I want to come to whatever practice you put on here.
No, Ashley, thank you so much. It's been a joy. It's been a privilege just to share time with you and talk about breath. Can't wait to come back and hopefully have a bigger workshop this time, either in Salt Lake or in Park City, but I'll keep you posted.
Amazing.
Thanks for listening to an episode of On the Table with Ashley. Subscribing to, rating, and reviewing our show helps us to continue to make quality episodes. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at amatendre.com or on Instagram at Amatond. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatond website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatond and Amatond's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatond.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.